Hey, I'm singer-songwriter, producer Nick DiMatteo, and welcome to Season 8, Episode 22 of Music is Not a Genre, MxG. This week's topic, boy bands, Part 1, Setting the World on Fire. I've been pretty excited about this episode for a while, this topic in general, so I'm not going to waste too much time getting into it. Of course, I'm going to say thanks for watching and listening. Like, share, subscribe, rate, review. I would really love for you to do that. Please go listen to Rex Music at nickdimatteo.com/music. You get all the links there to follow and listen and stream and all that stuff. I would really appreciate that. Things are really picking up here. I've got a big show coming up June 13th in NYC. That is a presentation of KITE to CAMDEN. It's a live video album presentation that I've been putting videos together for, etc. It's just going to be me and tracks and videos and singing and like a bunch of stuff, choreography and props and all that. It's going to be a real presentation. And if you come, you can be a part of it. You can be on stage with me for part of that show. That's my spiel right now. Let's get right back into it again. The topic is boy bands. Part 1, Setting the World on Fire. So why am I doing this? As I mentioned, I've been a huge fan of boy bands since I was a boy. And even though they're not maybe my top genre, there's something I always listen for and have listened to off and on since I was a kid, again, and I've followed the development of the form nonstop. Some of that music I like, some of it, nah, and some of it I love, actually. The subtitle, this is, of course, the first of 2 episodes, so it's the first of 2 subtitles, and this one's Setting the World on Fire. I mean, you know, that's kind of what happened. This first episode, here's what really happened. I started doing research, and there was so much out there. In contrast to girl groups, information about them, not quite as much out there, although I will be doing an episode of them in a couple of weeks. And I realized I needed to split this up into 2 episodes. And those 2 episodes are not going to be short episodes either. So this part 1 is going to go up to the 90s and starts back way farther than you think. And so that subtitle, Setting the World on Fire, refers to 2 things. A song by the Ink Spots, I don't want to set the world on fire. Proto boy band. That's how far back I'm going, even further back. And second thing it refers to is boy bands did eventually set the world on fire, at least the part of the world that's hot for men, you know, and that could be you, could be me, who knows. Show format. For this part 1, I'm going to do a prehistory, then a prehistory, then a thorough definition of boy band, just to set the record straight, and then the actual history starting in the 1960s and going up to just part of the 1990s and saving the rest for part 2. Some interim conclusions, featured song, of course, and questions. And the bonus M extra at patreon.com/music is not a genre. You're going to get 2 of them, of course, 2 episodes, 2 bonus M extras. This first one is going to be on all of the guys who broke from boy bands to have successful solo careers, and even some proto boy bands in there, significant solo careers, from Clyde McPhatter to Harry Styles and everyone in between and before and after who had a significant solo career from a boy band. That's the bonus M extra at patreon.com/music is not a genre. Sources, Google, Wikipedia, udiscovermusic.com, and that is just the letter U, and it's all one word. And Entertainment Weekly used to be a favorite magazine of mine until they stopped publishing real magazines. Disclaimers, of course, I'm not going to mention every boy band ever, not even counting the proto vocal groups. Let's just set them aside. There have to be thousands of boy bands. Even just counting the successful ones, you have to imagine there are a couple hundred. Right? But the history that I am presenting is going to be a cross-section of all that, and I believe that it's going to be comprehensive enough to cover every era and all the flavors and changes and all of that. Of course, I did not have time to listen to every great song from every band, but I listened to enough to give you a sense of how they sound in case you don't know them. I will be biased based on my own preferences. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on something that is very important, but is not really a part of this podcast, at least not for this episode, and that is there as in the music industry as a whole, there's always been exploitation, financial dishonesty, abuse, stuff like that. That has absolutely been true. Boy bands, there was a great documentary on it, which I'll mention later. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Just please know that it has existed on and off since forever. And at least in the cases that I have read about for all of these bands, the boy bands, the men, as they were part of these groups, are not to blame. They are the victims. And that's all I'm saying about that. And as usual, I do my best to keep this about the music. All right. So let's get into the first section, the prehistory. By the way, you guys just listening, I have sort of what I would call proto-Beatles, proto-boy band shirt, the Beatles. And I rolled my sleeves up to make me look more like a boy band. Yeah, whatever. That's the amount of, production work that I do other than the video and audio. So to do a proper history of boy bands, we have to go back much further. There have been male choirs since the time of ancient Greece and probably even before then. Been female choirs too, which I'll cover in girl groups. I'm not going to, there's not a lot of extant information on that, so it's not like I can cover them, but I'm not going to cover that in any detail. I'm also not going to cover Gregorian chant and kind of, choirs related to churches in any detail. But please know that for, at least for the most part, they were men. They were all men. There was not a lot of integration, if any, throughout the ages. And so they are kind of proto boy bands, and I'm sure they've been gathering as long as humans have been singing, as long as humans have been able to put, their thoughts to music. The reason they don't count choirs is because A, they're too big. There's a limit to how big a boy band can be. Although you'll find in part 2, boy, did boy bands grow in size from the last century to this century. And B, the point was the group and not the individuals. And that's a huge part of the development of boy bands as to what makes the difference between just a bunch of guys singing together, a proto boy band, or an actual boy band is the individuality that is a part of the group. And now you may say that's also true for boy bands, right? Because they're a group, and it is, but it has to do with emphasis and balance, and you'll see that as I talk about it. Boy bands balance the group with individuals. You know the members, often by name, or at least by them trading off lead vocals, while choirs ask for the individual to be subsumed into the collective. So, this is just an explanation to say I'm not going to go quite that far back. And there's no value judgments. I've been a part of both kinds of groups. Very, very briefly, of a couple of boy band type things. I've been part of choirs. It's just that they have different aesthetics and objectives. So that's enough about choirs. Let's get into the smaller ensembles, what I would call the chamber vocalist groups, so to speak. Though there were precursors to the precursors in the 18th century and probably even before. The history proper starts in the 19th century with the following 3 types of small male vocal groups. Glee clubs, which are still popular, started under that name in 1787 in London, to the best of my knowledge. Glees, where they get the name from, are English part songs, that be people singing different parts. Basically, they were the tunes of the day, as opposed to longer form classical music or more serious music. This idea was eventually adopted by American universities as early as the 1840s. The Harvard Glee Club in 1858 was predated by the Wesleyan Glee Club in 1846, who were the first to record in 1890. Yes, they recorded in 1890, and followed by many more university groups, University of Michigan, University of Pennsylvania, Yale. Most of if not all of these, probably all, are still going. Those same glee clubs that were formed in the 1800s are still going. Let's characterize glee clubs as historically the widest groups. That's not always the case, and it hasn't been, but at least historically, yes. That certainly changed quite a bit in the last 50 years or so. But I'm not going to be covering glee clubs of the last 50 years. It's just to say that things do change. This is just a prehistory in service of boy bands. The next type of small ensemble singing group in that era was the religious singing groups. Slave culture fostered lots of self-expression, and singing was one form. There were spirituals and field songs. They were often sung in groups, often utilizing harmony. And following abolition, many of these groups went professional and toured. The most notable being the Fisk Jubilee Singers, formed at the University of Nashville in 1871. They even performed for Queen Victoria and eventually recorded in 1909. I believe they're still around. Of the three types of groups, this religious ensemble has historically been most centered around African American culture and sound. There's no overestimating how much this music has shaped all of Western music. If you recall, if you've been listening, a few years ago, I did an episode called All Music is Black Music, and I explained what I meant by that, but this is part of the explanation. By the way, yes, the Fisks are still going. Barbershop quartets is the third type. The music style itself possibly dates back to the 17th century and actual barbershop singing. As far as the U.S., they began forming around the 1870s. Black Southern quartets, again, associated with actual barbershops, a community place, still is, has been for so long, with some of the first groups being the American Four, the Hamtown Students, the Unique Quartet, that's TETTE. The first to record was the Unique Quartet, again around 1890, followed by the Manhasset Quartet in 1891, recorded. But the tradition didn't really take off until the early 1900s, and especially 1910, after a hit song about barbershop quartets popularized the form. Coordinated dress was a big part of these groups. Keep that in mind. Usually it was a vest, straw hat, bow ties, spats, maybe sleeve garters. Kind of a gay 90s style. It was retro in the 1900s. It is important to stress that while the earliest origins were white Englishmen, it was black U.S. Southerners who spearheaded the development of barbershop quartets. And I'm going to assume that it became even more popular when white dudes took it up a bit later, because that's what happens with music. It still happens to this day, less so, but still, and it certainly happened throughout the last century. But it's also important to note that the barbershop style then became a mix of white and black music styles, which is key to the development eventually of proto-boy bands and boy bands. All of these groups shared a few characteristics, which is what makes them precursors to boy bands. They were all male. They were small as compared to choirs. They were primarily, if not entirely, a cappella, which is, not a prerequisite for being a boy band, but many are. They emphasized tight harmonies, divided among carefully balanced group members, usually tenor, baritone, bass. Or if they were, younger, if they were women, two sopranos, two altos, or S8Ep for a mixed group. Anyone who's been in a choir knows S8Ep, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. They intended to evoke emotion and a direct connection to the listener. Very important, key element. They often included some kind of swaying or dancing or physical movement. I'm sure you know why that's key, if you know boy bands at all. Setting aside what passed for trendy at the time and how dusty and or cheesy these groups can feel, there's not much difference between those older forms of male groups and boy bands, though we will talk about one significant difference later on. This generally takes us through the early part of the 20th century, which ends the prehistory and gets us to our prehistory. We can divide this prehistory into two broad eras, 1920s to 40s, and 1950s to generally almost all of the 1960s. That first era, which I've said in so many episodes now, was the start of the mass-produced and consumed recording era in the 20s, saw the rise of many vocal groups, some a cappella, others accompanied. We will get to that if that distinction matters in the definition that I give later. Of course, there were both very successful male and female and mixed groups. Some examples, just to give you the full prehistory. Male, these are key examples. The Mills Brothers, who started in the 1920s and went up to the 1980s. I'd like to buy a paper doll that I could call my own, was their number one hit in 1943. They were huge and seminal. And anybody who knows vocal groups knows the Mills Brothers. And also huge, the Ink Spots from the 30s to the 50s. If I didn't care in 1939 was their big #1 U.S. hit, among others. Both of these bands had many hits. As far as female groups, which again, I'm doing an entire episode on girl groups. I originally thought it was going to be a bonus, but there's plenty of information to do a full episode on girl groups, and I thought they deserved it. The Andrews Sisters, who were originally 1925 to 1953, and then intermittently through the early 1970s after that. The Boswell Sisters, 25 to 36. If you have ever listened to A History of Rock and 500 Songs, the theme song to that is the Boswell Sisters. And I'm not going to give you more details on these groups in particular because, again, I'm doing a full episode on girl groups in a couple of weeks. Mixed groups, so one would be the Merrimacs, the 1930s and 40s. That's something else I will mention in a different episode. All of these were what I call template acts. Close harmony, personalities, some movement, and all were very popular on the radio and live. And though they were largely segregated by both gender and ethnicity, taken as a whole, they encompassed black, white, male, female, and several substyles of vocalizing. There was no one specific sound to all these vocal groups, although there were trends, certainly. Again, this isn't a history about that, so that's as much as I'm going to give you there because it's, the kind of setting the tone, the prehistory. You can look up more info on particularly vocal groups of the 1930s and 40s. Very interesting stuff. It's impossible to describe how popular this form was. We know how popular boy bands are now in this moment because of BTS, etc. We know how popular they've been in other past eras, which I'll get to in these two episodes. None of us could remember, maybe some out there, how popular vocal groups were in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. It really was amazingly popular and how widespread. And you can't overestimate how much it influenced later music, especially some of the earliest rock and roll. As jump blues and R&B and other peppier forms of jazz and blues emerged in the late 1940s and early 1950s, vocal groups started to pick up on that feel and merge it with the existing vocal group template to create proto-doo-wop and actual doo-wop. Doo-wop was very prominently purveyed by two specific ethnic groups in the United States, not exclusively, but mostly, and that is African Americans and Italian Americans, in that order. African Americans, spearheaded it, pioneered it, of course, and Italian Americans took it up a few years later. Largely male, though many female doo-wop groups existed and had some hits, which I will talk about in the girl groups episode. They had tight harmonies. They had coordinated clothing, like the barbershop quartets and future boy bands. They had dance moves. Frequently, they sang about love. All of those things are boy band staples. Of course, doo-wop has routinely been considered an early subset of rock and roll that pulled heavily from R&B, more or less straddling those two nascent genres. The doo-wop acts flourished in the 1950s, and by flourished, I mean I haven't found a comprehensive list of all of the doo-wop acts in that era. Not even all of the ones who had some kind of a chart hit. It's insane how many there were. And they continued fairly strongly through the first half of the 1960s, during which time they influenced acts like the Beach Boys and the Beatles, both considered proto-boy bands, and fight me on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I will mention that later. And I think it is important to mention, well, actually, I'll mention that later too. Some of the best known and most significant male doo-wop groups, and this is a great list, pretty decent list. Billy Ward and his Dominoes, who were very transitional. As far as starting in an earlier era and leading up to the 50s. They had a hit, 60-Minute Man in 1951 was number 1 on the R&B charts and number 17 in the U.S. pop charts. The Orioles also bridged the 1940s and 50s vocal styles. They had a number 11 U.S. hit, Crying in the Chapel, in 1953. The Drifters, if you don't know the Drifters, you don't know music history. 1953 to present day, with more personnel changes as you could possibly imagine, even early on. They were also very transitional because that name was used for many different lineups whose sound changed as the members and trends changed. Their most popular era included the number 1 U.S. hit Save the Last Dance for Me in 1960. But they had other R&B and U.S. main chart hits both before and after that. And of course, the bonus MxG will, of course, talk about Ben E. King. as a breakout solo artist. So bonus some extra, patreon.com/music is not a genre. Male solo artists from boy bands. The Moonglows, whose vocals often mimicked instruments. Beatboxing, anybody? They had a number 1 R&B and number 20 U.S. pop hit, Sincerely, in 1954. The Penguins, Earth Angel, Earth Angel. Yes, I'm hoarse. 1954, number 8 U.S. hit. The Platters, Oh Yes, I'm the Great Pretender. Ooh. 1955, number 1 U.S. hit. 5 Satins, In the Still of the Night. 1956, number 24 U.S. hit. I'm surprised it wasn't higher. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. If you're going to name one proto boy band who truly set the template for what was to come, it's got to be Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. That signature soloist with the group and the way they dance and all of that. Why Do Fools Fall in Love was their number 6 U.S. hit in 1956. The Del Vikings, Come Little Darling, Come and Go With Me, 1957, number 4 U.S. hit. And then another band that I think really represents that proto-boy band setup is Little Anthony and the Imperials. Tears on My Pillow, 1958, number 4 U.S. hit. By the way, every key I'm singing in is not the right key. That I can tell you, I never sing in the right key unless I've just heard the song. The Coasters, Yakety Yak, Don't Talk Back, is 1958, number 1 U.S. hit. The Crests, 16 Candles, 1958, number 2 U.S. hit. The Mystics, Hushabye, 1959, number 20 U.S. hit. Dion and the Belmonts, Teenager in Love, 1959, number 5 U.S. hit, among others. The Capris, There's a Moon Out Tonight, 1961, was a number 3 U.S. hit. The Duprees, You Belong to Me, 1962, number 7 U.S. hit. The Four Seasons, again, if you don't know them, you don't know Broadway, you don't know music history, you don't know vocal groups. They deserve their own episode, honestly, for many reasons, and I may do that one day. Sherry, 1962, was just one example of one of their major hits, number 1. Temptations, My Girl, number 1 U.S. And yes, the bonus some extra on patreon.com/music is not a genre will absolutely include David Ruffin from The Temptations as a breakout solo artist. All of this stuff persisted and far longer than we realized, because even though it kind of waned for part of the 1960s, it was still there. And weirdly enough, while it was still there and morphing into other things, there was a revitalization of the earlier forms of it, the doo-wop forms, from bands like Sha Na Na and Grease, the Broadway musical, blah, 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 boy, am I stuttering. And that happened late 1960s, early 1970s. So that form was barely gone for very long before it became retro. But what we need to point out in this 1950s to 60s era is something that also made rock and roll markedly different from its similar sounding precursors. And my episode on the true history of rock and roll is worth checking out. So search that at youtube.com/music is not a genre, or wherever you listen, or find out how far back that kind of music really goes. I talk about that in that episode. That's that. Unlike pretty much all the previous vocal groups and music in general, with some exceptions, of course, rock and roll and doo-wop were meant to appeal to teens. That is a huge part of the development of boy bands, along with the merging of these sounds and ideas with rock acts like the Beatles and the Beach Boys and other proto-boy band groups incorporating all male tight harmonies. That's the big pivot that created the right environment for true boy bands to emerge. And those bands, along with, of course, you have to mention the Monkees, they were the vital next step from Beatles to boy bands. They incorporated the cult of personality into the mix. That is, that every member had a distinct, if broadly defined and possibly fake, persona, and every fan had their favorite members, the cute one, the sexy one, all of that stuff, the introspective one. That is still true to this day with BTS and other groups. Side note that both before and after the advent of boy bands, one major commonality is that often one or more members would break out into successful solo careers. I've been talking about that. Here are some examples: Clyde McPhatter, Benny King, David Ruffin, all of the Beatles, some of the Monkees. And again, bonus MxG, extra, patreon.com/music is not a genre. You get a talk about all of those solo artists. So this is where we get to the end of the prehistory, and we're going to get into the actual history. But before we get there, I'm going to give you a definition. What exactly is a boy band? We need to know exactly what defines boy band, what they are, what they aren't. First, what boy bands aren't. They aren't mixed gender. They may be mixed, they have been and are mixed sexuality, but not mixed gender. They don't do anything harder than pop tinged with other genres, tinged with R&B, tinged with rock, tinged with EDM and stuff like that. That's still true to this day, I would say. They don't get artsy. So, for example, the Bee Gees might have been proto-boy band like the Beatles, but they were too artsy to be considered an actual boy band. Again, I did a whole history of the Bee Gees in another episode. Look it up. They write mostly and sing mostly about love and all that, or, empowerment in one way or another, and not other more esoteric or disturbing subjects. They have to be driven or marketed to appeal to teens more than adults, so the music has to fit that mold. So now as to what boy bands are, let's go over the characteristics I mentioned before. All boys or men, boys to men, tight harmonies, usually over the tenor baritone bass range, unless there are more or fewer guys. Coordinated wardrobe, coordinated movements like dancing, many songs about love, also self-reference and self-aggrandizing songs, again, like Backstreet's Back, baby. Also, there need to be 3 or more members, otherwise you're just a duo, which is a group but not a group, you know what I'm saying? Now comes the first disputed part. Do boy bands play their own instruments? Doesn't matter. That's my answer. Or both. From the very beginning, proto-boy bands and boy bands were of both types. Those who played their own instruments and those who didn't. Second dispute, are boy bands or vocal groups of any kind who don't play their own instruments real bands? As a vocalist, I can tell you yes. As if you are a vocalist and a musician and for some reason don't believe that vocal groups are not real bands, then you're rockist. And I believe that only bands who play their own instruments have integrity. That is a rockist and elitist stance. Bands can come in many forms. It's also elitist to be against bands who don't write their own material. Yes, the bands I prefer, they tend to do that. But many other artists I love, especially out of the rock and hip hop worlds, don't necessarily write all of their own material. Meaning not the rock and hip hop worlds. There's other pop, etc. They don't necessarily write all their own material, or they collaborate. Finally, and perhaps most controversially, is this question. Is there always some degree of factory, an external force that creates a boy band? No, actually, surprisingly, and that's to me because there are 2 overarching types. Family, friends family, and non-family. So people who know each other, people who didn't. Throughout this history, and including the proto-history, those bands who started as families started of their own volition. Sure, some of those families had patriarchs or were de facto managers or actual managers, and some of those managers were helping to manufacture a certain level of presence, persona, success, but they were not created by committee, let's say, or by auditions. And those bands who were put together, some did it themselves, especially in the proto eras. One guy wanted to put a band together, he auditioned other members, or their manager did. But more often than not, they were created by an external force, which we'll get to more later in this episode and then in the next episode. That's why the Monkees are often seen as the first actual proto-boy band, because they were manufactured. They were put together by audition. Thinking of the Beatles as step 1, persona, teen fandom, the clothes, etc., but not the dance moves. And they put themselves together. The Monkees, they were step 2, same as the Beatles, but created via auditions, manufactured, still a great band. That would be the next step towards the actual boy bands. I hope that helps to define what a boy band is, but feel free to weigh in and let me know if you agree or disagree. I always want to hear from you. And we are going to get to the history. Let's start right now, a few minutes before break, with the history. Keep in mind that like most of my episodes, this is a survey history. There's not enough time or resources to be 100% comprehensive, but my choices are highly illustrative of the history and developments. Also keep in mind that this means that I won't, of course, be doing full histories of any specific band, just enough info to make it clear and kind of get you going, wet your whistle, get you curious to look into it more. What I will do is flesh out histories of bands you'd be less likely to know. And then the others, I'll be like, if I have to flesh this out, then where have you been living? We're going to start with the late 1960s and the 1970s, which is the first wave, which I call bubbling under. Like all other types of music, the origin of boy bands predates the emergence and popularity of that type of music. There are 4 boy bands that fit this bill, all of whom had major hits in 1969-70, thus kicking off the first boy band era. I'm sorry, my wording is messed up here. There are 4 boy bands in the 70s that fit this bill, but 2 of them had major hits right at the end of the 60s and kicked off that first boy band era. But both of those 2 also started far earlier. What all of these have in common is that they were families first. This first wave. I'm going to do them in order of when they hit the charts, and that is going to be how I do all of these episodes, both of the boy band episodes and the girl group episodes, either in the US or the UK. And I'm going to start with the band that you know right after the break, the mid-roll. Talk to you in a bit. Hey, MxG fans, thank you as always for watching and listening. Listeners, go to youtube.com/@musicisnotagenre. You get a video for every episode of this podcast. Watchers, go to nickdimatteo.com/musicisnotagenre if you would rather just listen. And everyone, please take some time out to go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre to support this podcast, my band rec, and everything I do for as little as $1 a month. Speaking of everything I do, nickdimatteo.com really does have it all. If you're interested in unique and quirky t-shirts that I've all personally hand designed, go to nickdimatteo.com/shop and you can find it all there, including discounts if you sign up for my newsletter or Patreon. If you're someone who's always wanted to write a song, has just never figured out how to get there, let me work with you. I am the Song Coach. Go to nickdimatteo.com/thesongcoach, and whether you're a complete beginner or completely advanced, I can get you there. You can book a free 30-minute call right there on the site. And of course, I am always releasing new music. Go to nickdimatteo.com/music to find it all. My complete discography is there. All of the social links are there. And of course, please like, share, subscribe, rate, review. Do it for the podcast. Do it for the music. Sharing is especially valuable to all of us indie creators. I really appreciate your support, your eyes and ears. Thank you for hanging with me for this mid-roll, and let's get back to the show. All right, we are back, and we're going to get right into it because there's a lot of material to cover. And that first boy band in the first wave, first era, is the Jackson 5, also known as eventually as the Jacksons. They were formed in 1964. They released their first single, Big Boy, in 68, which didn't chart, and then I Want You Back the following year became their first of a string of #1 singles. It came from their first of 16 albums, released 69 to 89. Diana Ross presents the Jackson 5. They needed her kind of to sign off on that Motown felt because that's what helped to popularize them. All of their albums hit the top 100, with their highest being #4, both ABC and third album from 1970, and Victory in 84 also hit #4. They were Jackie, Jermaine, Tito, Marlon, Michael, and then Randy eventually joined in 76. They had various ins and outs and breaks, and then Jackie and Jermaine and Tito and Marlon reformed in 2012. Jermaine left in 2021-ish. Tito died in 2024, but Jackie and Marlon are still at it as the Jacksons. A massive success, weathering dips in popularity. Every member has had a solo career. I'm going to mention a couple of them in the bonus some extra at patreon.com/musicisnotagenre. They continued to have top 40 singles through 1984. Number 17's Torture in that year, and top 100 singles through 1989. Nothing That Compares to You, number 77, not the Prince song, in that year. If you need more history on them, you first need to describe for me the cave that you've been living in. That's much as I'm going to tell you about the Jacksons. I don't think you need more. Next, Osmonds, or the Osmond Brothers. They actually started as even earlier than the Jacksons, as very young children in 1958, when the four oldest brothers, Merrill, Alan, Wayne, and Jay, formed a barbershop quartet. Hello, connections. They got their break on the Andy Williams Show in '62 and released their first album, Songs We Sang on the Andy Williams Show, and their single, Be My Little Baby Bumblebee, in 1963. Donnie then joined that year, and Jimmy in 1967 briefly. Marie in 1973 through 1979, when they were then called the Osmonds. And she and Donnie left that year. The four oldest carried on after that, adding Travis in 1991. Jimmy returned for an entire decade starting in 2007, and a few blips here and there, and then they kind of wrapped it all up in 2023. Wayne and Alan have both subsequently died. They released several more albums and singles to no avail and didn't hit their smash until number one bad apple don't spoil the whole bunch, girl. Released in 1970, charted in 1971, clearly taking off on the Jacksons' success. And why not? It served them well. Though they also incorporated lots of other influences, including rock. They had a few top 10 hits, several top 20 and 40, and a bunch more below that. Other than One Bad Apple, which is their only number one, I highly recommend the song Crazy Horses, number 14 hit from 1972. You will not believe that that's the Osmonds if you've never heard it. They continued to release singles through 1987, with one outlier in 2018. They stopped charting, though, by 1976. Decent run. Many members had solo careers. I will mention, I guess, at least one of them, the bonus M Extra, patreon.com/music is not a genre. And I'm not going to talk more about solo careers in this episode much, if at all, because you know that that's what the bonus is. I'd consider these two, the Jacksons and the Osmonds, the first breakout boy bands, but there are two more in this first wave. The Bay City Rollers, Scottish band, started by brothers Alan, who died in 2018, and Derek Longmire, and their cousin Neil Porteous in 1964 as the Ambassadors, quickly changing to the Saxons, and then they landed on their actual name in 1969. They had several other members during this period, none of whom stuck it out to their heyday. They also had their first single, Keep On Dancing, hit number 9 in the UK in 1971, after which they had 10 more top 20 UK hits through 77. Eric Faulkner joined in 72, and Miss McCune, I guess, joined in 73. And took over lead vocals. And that's when they really broke out. Recorded their first of 16 albums, Rollin', in 1974. And of course, their first U.S. hit was Saturday Night, 1975, number 1. And they have 5 more top 40 hits and some others in the U.S. through 1977. Roller Mania was sort of like Beatlemania, the fan club. Lots more personnel changes through the years. What a list of members. This is actually historically common in vocal groups that have many, many, many members. Because the template's there, you just fill in the roles that you need. Less so in the 80s and beyond, and you'll see why when we get there. They broke up in 87, had some reunions. They reformed with only one of their heyday members, Stuart Wood, in 2018, and have continued since then. Bay City Rollers, worth checking out, especially Saturday Night. Final band I'll cover in this period is one I never heard of. The Hudson Brothers. Bill, Brett, and Mark started their group in Portland, Oregon in '65, called them My Sirs, and then the New Yorkers. And they released several singles under the name New Yorkers, then changed to Everyday Hudson in 1970, just Hudson in 71, and released more singles, none of which charted except one at 110. They changed the Hudson Brothers gradually 1972 to 74 and released a bunch more singles. Their first of 6 albums, Hudson in 72 through 1980, their last album. They were offered a variety show which spun off into a Saturday morning kids show which made them teen idols, which is what got them their first of 4 charting hits, number 21, So You Are a Star. Very Beatles, Bee Gees, very nice. And it's not streaming, so you got to look it up on YouTube. Their last hit was 1976's Help Wanted, which landed number 70, after which they released several more non-charting singles and broke up in 81. Pretty solid band, worth listening to. The only reasons they were considered a boy band is because the brothers, and they were young, and the kids show, that catapulted them into the teen fame. And boy bands of that type were hot due to Bay City Rollers, so they got lumped in just enough to give them a little success. I don't think there were any other boy bands of note in the 1970s, and it would take a while to reboot the form because it kind of lost popularity. Which brings us to the next era, the 1980s, second wave, taking form. This is the first era I remember thinking of and listening to boy bands. This era is sort of a kickoff with Musical Youth's Pass the Dutchie in 1982. Formed in 79 in Birmingham, UK. They were together through 85, and then they've reformed in 2001 and have continued to stay together. They were started by two fathers putting their sons together. So it's, again, like one of those situations where it was family, but they're put together by patriarchs. 2 albums in their first iteration in the 80s, and then 1 more in 2018. Several charting singles in the UK and elsewhere, and there were 3 in the US through 1983, including Pass the Dutchie and Unconditional Love with Donna Summer. But I think Musical Youth is slightly more than just a footnote, because there were reggae for the most part, and that was an important part of showing some of the influences that would pop up later on in pop music in general. But the era really jumped off when New Edition hit. They were formed in 78 and meant to be the new edition of the Jackson 5. In form and initially in sound. The original lineup was Ricky Bell, Michael Bivins, Ronnie DeVoe, Belle Biv DeVoe, Bobby Brown, and Ralph Tresvant, all of whom did significant work outside of the group eventually. Johnny Gill replaced Bobby Brown when he left. Contrary to the retrofitting, they were not formed by a Svengali. They came together themselves, and they were eventually managed by Maurice Starr. Not the first jerk to mastermind a boy band. Maybe that might have been Joe Jackson. I'm sure there was somebody even before Joe Jackson. Certainly not the last, and certainly not the worst. So again, they were a bridge between the bands who formed themselves and the ones who were cobbled together by a mastermind. They released 5 albums during their first run through 1991, another during a short reunion in 96, and 1 more in 04. And they permanently reunited in 02, at least so far. As of this date, all 6 members are part of the band. Insane. That's rare. It happens a couple other times, you'll see later. Their first single, Candy Girl, number 46 May, number 1 R&B, number 17 Dance, was in 83, and I loved that song. They had a string of hits through 1989, and then 2 more top 10 hits in 96. They kicked off the second wave, certainly more than Musical Youth. I can't say enough about how much I loved them. They even got me retroactively interested in the Jackson 5. I don't remember all their singles, but here are the ones I can still sing. Candy Girl. Is this the end? Well, that's Is This the End? Candy Girl. A popcorn love. Cool it now. Mr. Telephone Man. I'm lost in love. You can count me out. They did a cover of Earth Angel and a cover of Tears on My Pillow, actually featuring Little Anthony. Nice throwback to proto boy bands. If it isn't love, can you stand the rain? Probably more than I can recall from probably any boy band, honestly. 3 top 10, 5 top 20, 8 top 40, 16 top 100. They added 2 key elements that would carry through the most iconic and successful boy bands from there on out. 1, electronic instrumentation leaning funky, and rapping. When they added those 2 things in, boy bands never looked back. They, more than any other, made it possible for other boy bands to form. And I'd go so far as to say without them, we wouldn't have had the next boy band phases that we will get to. And we'll get to one that has a direct connection. But first, we'll stop off at 3 other bands worth mentioning in the 80s. 1, Menudo, formed in Puerto Rico in 1977 by Edgardo Diaz, producer. One of the biggest boy bands of all time globally. They were together through 2009. That's a long run. And then reformed in 2015 and are still going, more or less. 32 albums from 1977 to 1996. Famously, the band members rotate based on aging out. There is an age limit. So there have been over 40, to my count, the most of any modern era boy band. But I think the Drifters might beat them. The only famous one, of course, is Ricky Martin. And again, bonus MX to patreon.com/music is not a genre, although many others have gone on to success in usually outside the U.S. And outside of Menudo. First single, 1982, and their most recent one in 2023. Some of the songs in English, some in Spanish. A few have charted on the Hot 100, Latin and R&B charts as well. Only Hold Me, 1985, number 62, made a significant impact in the U.S., but they were ever present along with musical youth in the 80s, as well as The Next Band, which represented how the boy band idea was spreading beyond groups of white or black kids. This is sort of an honorable mention because, like the Osmonds in their certain era and Pentatonics afterwards, they're a mixed gender group. And one people have forgotten all too much and need to be reminded of, the Jets. Formed also in 1977, they're a Tongan-American family from Minnesota. 8 siblings, Leroy, Eddie, Eugene, who died in 2024, Heine, Rudy, Kathy, Elizabeth, and Moana. So evenly divided boys and girls. They performed for years before releasing their first recorded music. The self-titled album in 85 was the first of 4 in the 80s, then 3 more in the 90s, then one in 06, one in 2014. Their first single was also in 85, Curiosity, which charted US R&B number 8 and dance number 21, but not on the main. And then When Crush on You hit in 1986. It's their first of 10 charting main singles, 5 of them in the top 10. That song I revisit every few years because I love it. And it's actually more complex than you would think. And it's infectious. Got a crush on you. Back to boy bands proper. Thanks for that honorable mention, Nicholas. Here's one I never heard of. Bros. B-R-O-S. Luke and Matt Goss and friend Craig Logan. They were formed in Surrey, UK in 86. So once again, the predominance of family in these boy bands. Together, 86 to 92, with a reunion in the teens, 20 teens. They released 3 albums during their first period, all of which were top 20 UK and 2 in the top 10. And the first one was top 200 US, which is why we don't know them. 11 singles, and then a 13th in 2017. All of those first 11 charted in the UK, none charted in the US. They had 8 top 10 hits, 2 more top 20, and 1 27, and then Outlier. Biggest hits were When Will I Be Famous, number 2, Drop the Boy, number 2, I Owe You Nothing, number 1 UK, I Quit, number 4, Cat Among the Pigeons / Silent Night, number 2, and Too Much, number 2. Matt had a significant solo career, although I don't think I talk about him in the bonus. Luke became an actor, and you might know his name, Luke Goss. Pretty straightforward boy band songs. Finally, in this era, we get to the boy band that came on in the second wave, but truly were a bridge between the second and third waves. NKOTB, New Kids on the Block, formed in Dorchester, Massachusetts in 1984 by Maurice Starr. He was both inspired by his work with New Edition and forced to move on because he embezzled funds. He knew New Edition was a great template and wanted to create an equivalent white band to broaden the appeal. Starr chose Donnie Wahlberg, who brought on his brother Mark for just a brief few months and who quit, went on to his solo song with the Funky Bunch, and then acting. And then his friends Jamie Kelly, who also left early, Jordan Knight and Danny Wood, then Jonathan Knight, so another brother. Joey McIntyre replaced Jamie Kelly. Template was the same Neo Jackson 5 thing as New Edition, with Joey being the cute front boy. The original name was Ninook, N-Y-N-U-K, and then their actual name from a song Donnie wrote and arranged. A lot of these boy band members were far more involved in the development of their music than you might think, which is one reason that people should stop saying they're not legitimate bands. 5 albums during their first run in 1984 to 94, 3 more after their reunion in 2008 to present. 5 were top 10 and 2 were number 1. Initially marketed to black audiences, their first 2 singles in 86 did not chart main, though Be My Girl charted number 90 R&B, and that caused them to shift from a more bubblegum New Edition sound to something harder. New Kids, they went real hard. From 1988's Please Don't Go Girl, number 10, through 1990's Tonight, every single charted top 10 and 3 went to number 1. They had a few more chart besides that, including one in 2008. Of course, massive career, New Kids on the Block. One of the bands you have to mention if you're going to do a boy band episode. I'm only, and in the bonus I'm extra on patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, Of course, some of these did go on to solo careers. I'm only going to discuss guys who had music solo success and not actors, producers, etc. So you're not going to hear me talk about Donnie or Mark. Well, Mark wasn't really a part of the band, not really. So most people in most of these bands did eventually go on to success in various fields, not just music. And Jonathan is likely the first gay member of any boy band, at least the first gay member who we know of. But although he didn't come out until 2011, after being outed earlier. This is a not insignificant fact because A, boy bands took on quite a strong gay following from this point on, if not even earlier, and B, many boy bands ended up having gay members, and it sort of broke the seal on that, which I think is important. Again, like with the Jacksons, that's about all the history I need to provide on this band because they're so famous. They're also the last successful 80s boy band, though I have to give a shout out to Take 6, who were hugely influential as an a cappella gospel group, formed in 1980, debut album in 1988. Take 6 was a huge influence on some of these bands upcoming, which brings us to the early mid-90s. Last era we'll talk about before next week. As stated, New Kids on the Block ushered in the third wave from the second wave. They really kind of set the template for the third wave. If the first wave was testing the form and kind of developing it, the second was solidifying the form. The third was the first giant success and explosion of the form. But before we get there, we have to talk about the early 90s and three bands who helped to usher in that major success. Belle Biv DeVoe, not strictly a boy band, but they came from a boy band. Of course, from New Edition, 1989 to present. They've actually released 4 albums. 1990's Poison, number 5, number 1 R&B. 1993, Hootie Mac, number 19, number 6 R&B. 2001's BBD, number 62 R&B. 2017, Three Stripes, number 18 May, number 10 R&B. I haven't heard most of that. I would love to listen to it. I'll probably catch up with them soon. What really matters, of course, is Poison, number 3, number 1990, and number 1 R&B. In that year, I did an acoustic cover of that, which you can look up youtube.com/appmusic. It's not a genre. Look up my cover of Poison. It's still iconic, still referred to as a benchmark of production and feel, sound. And that same year, Do Me hit number 3 May, number 4 R&B, and BBD, I Thought It Was Me, number 26 May, number 1 R&B. They had a few other hits through 93, including the number 10, The Best Things in Life for 3 in 92, featuring Luther Vandross and Janet Jackson and Ralph Tresvant. So a bit of a mini reunion. And then 4 singles since 2001, including 2 in the teens that hit top 20 R&B. Which I got to listen to. And along with one of the upcoming mega bands that relaunched the form, BBD helped to fame a young hip-hop boy band called ABC, another bad creation, 1988 to 95, and a one-off reunion after that. Chris Sellers, Marlis, Mark, Demetrius, Pugh, Red, David Shelton, Rommel, Chapman, Adrian Witcher, there's GA. 2 albums in the early 90s, including Coolin' at the Playground, number 7, 1991, which was number 2 R&B. Several singles through 93, including the smash hit, Aisha, you know I want you so bad, and I like to get to know you better. 1990, number 9, number 6 R&B. And 1991's Playground, number 10 May, number 4 R&B. Look up ABC. Very cool band. Finally, and very young at the time. Finally, we have a band that was far more successful than you probably remember, if you remember them at all. Color Me Bad. From 85 to 98, from 2010 to 2019, and then from 2022 to present, they were formed by Brian Abrams, Mark Calderon, Sam Waters, and Kevin Thornton, with many lineup changes since only Mark Calderon remains to this day. They released 4 albums in 91 to 98, including their debut, CMB, reached number 3 May, number 10 R&B. It's an international smash. They had lots of singles in that era, that first era in the 90s, and one in 2022. Their mega hit, Interpolation, which in that case meant they were sued, and rightfully so, at least the producer. I Want to Sex You Up. Ooh, I want to sex you up all night. Number 2, 1991, number 1 R&B, was not their biggest hit. Those would be the follow-ups that year. I Adore Me More, number 1 on both charts, and All for Love, which went number 1 main, and I think it's secretly my favorite song of theirs. They had 3 more top 20 hits the following year and 3 more top 25 through 1996. It's one of those bands that deserves more mention because they were multiracial. and were better at embodying the R&B sound of the day than New Kids on the Block and most of the other lily white bands. Although, hey, New Kids on the Block were great. Showing future mega bands how far you could go to really honor that music, whatever ethnicity you are. Now that we've hit the 1990s entry point, let's talk about two mega bands to wrap up this episode that truly started the third wave, one each across the Atlantic. Take That. Formed in 1990 in Manchester, UK, Gary Barlow, Howard Donald, Mark Owen, Robbie Williams, and Jason Orange. They ran until 96 and they broke up. They reformed without Williams in 05, who came on briefly 2010 to 2014, and then he and Jason Orange both left and the other three are still at it. They released 9 albums so far, 1992 to 2023. All are number 1 or 2 in the UK. None have ever charted in the US. That's why nobody knows them. Many singles, 91 to 96, and then again 2006 to present. Only one of them charted in the US. Back for Good reached number 7 in 1995, but they had 12 number 1 hits in the UK, 20 in the top 10, and several more in the top 20. Mega success. Though known more in retrospect for their influence, here in the US, they were megastars everywhere else. Or for their influence here in the U.S. Wow, sometimes I don't read my own writing. They didn't have any influence in the U.S., but they were international stars. They and New Kids on the Block proved the form could travel the globe. The second mega band from the U.S., Boyz II Men, Philly, 1985. Nathan Morris and Mark Nelson started Unique Attraction in 85. Other members joined in. 2 years later, they added Wanya Morris, no relation to the other Morris, and then Sean Stockman, and then Michael McCary in 88. And they renamed themselves Boyz II Men that year after a contemporary song by New Edition, one of their influences. Another influence of theirs, Take 6. Of course, Belle Biv DeVoe played a large part in their success and helping them to success, just like they did for ABC. They have had 15 albums from 1991's Smash, Cooley High Harmony through 2017. 5 have reached the top 10 and 2 more in the top 20. Motown Philly was their number 3 breakout hit of 91, followed by It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday, number 2. A couple more. After that, the 1992's End of the Road was their first number 1. They had other charting hits and then number 1s, I'll Make Love to You and On Bended Knee, number 1 in 1994, both. More hits, including 1995's number 2, Water Runs Dry, and 1997's number 1, 4 Seasons of Loneliness. They had another top 10 and then some more charting and then a few more charted on R&B through 2011. They were phenoms. They are legendary still. They're proud Philly compatriots. Hello. Hugely influential to future boy bands and other R&B bands, and they're still going strong live. Though not the first, they were probably the most famous boy band to lean heavily on R&B and even gospel, again influencing the direction of boy band music ever after. Even though for sure in the third wave you could almost consider these bands as proto-fourth. Okay, so these are the bands I didn't realize that I was going to mention, and I guess I'm going to do it. This is an extended episode. I don't remember where I cut off from episode 1 and episode 2. These bands that third wave was, to me, lesser in terms of popularity than the next wave, which was peak boy band era, even though you can't deny Boyz II Men's success, and Take That, to be frank. But this fourth wave, they wouldn't have come together without the influence from those third wave bands. Shades of things to come were already brewing in South Korea when Seo Taiji and Boys formed in 92. And they're considered the first K-pop boy band, but of course, we knew nothing about them or almost any South Korean music until 20 years later with Gangnam Style. And I'm going to cover K-pop music in next week's bonus. Boyzone, never heard of them. Formed in Dublin in 1993, active until 2000, and then 2007 to 2019, and then I think briefly this year. 7 albums from 1995 to 2018, all top 20 in the UK and Ireland. One from 1998, Where We Belong, hit 167 in the US. No singles have charted in the US, that's why I'd never heard of Boyzone. First single in 1994, number 3 in Ireland, was a remake of the Four Seasons, Working My Way Back to You, nice throwback to a proto-boy band, followed by 18 singles that hit in the top 5, both the UK and Ireland, a bunch of others. Clearly hugely successful, fairly throwback sound. some folk, some retro, all pop. Again, never heard of them. There's another band that formed in 1993 that would change the stature and status of boy bands forever. And they are going to be saved for next week, because this double episode is shaping up to be way larger than life. Hint, hint. Interim conclusions. First of all, wow, what a journey so far. It's a lot, and we're only half done. These bands run the range of sounds, both retaining the main boy band characteristics while managing to evolve fairly consistently. Each era saw countries outside of the U.S. dip their toes into boy bands. 1970s Bay City Rollers from Scotland, 1980s Musical Youth and Bros from UK, Menudo from Puerto Rico, so they're the United States people, come on. 1990s, Take That from the UK, Boyzone from Ireland, and more. And we'll see that shift insanely away from the US in the next episode. Summary of the evolution so far. This summary is a recap of some of next week, what I'll cover next week as well. 1920s to 40s, close harmony as craft. The barbershop and swing era was built around tight, intimate harmonies and mic technique befitting the studio limitations and emphasis at the time. Minimal production, clear lead with tightly stacked backing vocals. Smooth and restrained, but emotionally direct. As the proto-proto. 50s and 60s doo-wop to soul. Male vocal groups started following the general rock and roll trend of appealing to teens while integrating a wider range of influences, white and black influences. And they had more energy, they had more movement, gospel-influenced harmony, stronger rhythm sections, pop crossover appeal, fuller arrangements with strings, and all of that stuff, early multi-tracking, more dynamic leads, more call and response, more dramatic, more romantic, more rhythmically grounded. 1970s, the soul roots and soft pop polish. There was a real split between those two things. Some bands would go soul, Jackson 5, parts of the Osmonds. Some would go soft pop, like Osmonds again, Hudson Brothers, even Bay City. They were now teen pinups and heartthrobs, which set the stage for that kind of dynamic to rule by the late 1980s. The 70s were seminal for boy bands. They still had a live band feel. They were still very close to traditional bands, played their own instruments more often than not. 1980s transition to pop spectacle, the decade when the boy band truly first emerged as standalone cultural phenomenon. And by the end of that decade, all elements were in place to set the stage for every future boy band so far. Choreography, image, fan culture, drum machines and synths and electronic instruments and rapping and certain kinds of clothing. They were the blueprint for the modern boy band. We're going to get to the rest of the summary next week. Do not forget bonus MXtra, patreon.com/musicisnotagenre on all the solo careers, which is going to cover from the 1940s to today. So not just up to 1980. Already we can see how every step of the way proto and early boy band development would add in elements that would converge to shape the boy bands of today. Speaking of shaping, the featured song. As mentioned at least once early on, and probably twice, I've been a boy band fan since New Edition, and they have for sure influenced my work, at least from time to time, but probably more globally than I even realize. Pop. A colleague of mine rightfully called out my boy band influence on a couple of songs from Rek's new album, KITE to CAMDEN, and those will be the featured songs for these episodes. That was deliberate. It's something I've been subverting for a while in favor of indie rock and indie pop aesthetics, and I wanted to get away from my pop roots for a while, but I felt I needed to be truer to my range of styles and influences and my roots, so I brought it back. There are back-to-back songs on KITE to CAMDEN, tracks 4 and 5, that clearly show the boy band influence. And this week, I'm choosing Rek's currently most popular track on streaming, and from the new singles collection, All on Me. It's a typical funky pop ballad with the backup singing and all of that. One of those kinds of boy band songs that is written to feature one vocalist but have backup singers. It tells a story of a guy who is mourning the potential end of a relationship and how he realizes that he keeps blaming other things, but it's all on me, quote unquote. I'm the one who did it. And I mean, there's more convoluted things in there, but it's a damn good pop song. And there's a twist, a vocal, kind of lyrical twist at the end that I think you'll like. You can stream it at nickdimatteo.com/discography. or on recarea.bandcamp.com. And you can also just listen to it in a minute. Please do both, though. Please stream it if you can. Questions. Are you into boy bands? What are your favorites? Were you aware how far back in history this paradigm stretched? Did you know how influential this music has been? I'd like to know your answers to these and all other questions, because as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging with me for part 1 of boy bands. Almost put up the wrong finger. Next week, part 2.
We had a bad fight last night, but that's not where the story ends. You said we'd wake up and make up, but I said we should just be friends. I got all stuck in my head, heard not one word you said, and this morning I had to leave, couldn't breathe. And so if last night was our last night, then I guess that's all on me. On me, on me, you know it. On me. We took a long walk, had a hard talk, but that's not where it all went wrong. You said I need help, that I'm not myself. I said, baby, maybe we just don't get along. Knew I was making it worse than it was. I'm cursed 'cause the bad stuff is all I see. It's all I see. So if that long walk was our last talk, then I guess that's all on me. It's been a fucked up day in every way, but I guess that's something I have to own. I tried to call you, but couldn't get through. It's better maybe to leave bad enough alone, but I can't run from the truth. I'm bad enough alone in this room, and I love almost everything about you. I can't give up the fight, gotta let go of last night and focus on what we could be. And that's all on me. On me. All on me. Such a tragedy. Oh, I want you